Now, let's talk about leadership. And because it seems in Illinois we have had a leadership crisis. This problem has been around for, 20, 25 years? There were people 20 years ago making these dire predictions about today, about tonight. And they were union people, they were lawmakers, they were governors, they're all business people, Civic Federation, you name it. They've been talking about this for decades. And nothing was ever done. Nothing. And now, on the April 17th, I think is the date, we're supposed to have a report from the committee that the governor talked about in his budget address. Is there going to be anything are there going to be some firm recommendations, or will this legislature revert to what it always does, which is put it off after the election, and after the election, nobody does anything anyway? Can we expect anything on the 17th, concrete in terms of recommendations that can be formed into legislation that can be acted upon? Are we going to see that? Let's talk to the lawmakers who are on that committee.
And part of this is we're not done with the work yet, so we can't tell you exactly.
But you've got what?
We're close. Yeah, we're meeting two more times this week, and we're close. I want to go back to another comment really quick about things we agree on, and then we'll talk about going forward on this. We agree on not kicking the can down the road in any way, shape, or form on pensions anymore. I mean, we do agree on that, and we're working out to make sure that this thing is sustainable. The longer we wait, the more hard it gets and the more costly it's going to be for everyone. So if there's any comment about can we come up with things that can work, yeah, if we sit down and talk about it, we can. Do we understand the numbers? We can. But I personally want to see something done before the end of this session, because I don't want to put it off until November and have to go through this again.
Charles, I feel like, first of all, Illinois is not the only state going through this problem. So to point out the leadership in this state and say,
but it's the only one we care about,
and we are somehow hanging out there by ourselves, I think would be completely erroneous.
But it's the only one we care about.
Okay, so it's not. Most states and localities are dealing with this problem. Second of all, in 1995, the legislature passed a pension reform bill that, ultimately, as we found out, has kicked the can down the road. But I'm not going to impugn their motives at that time to say that it was only political, and they were, I'm going to say I think that they were trying to address a problem, and yes, it dumped in our laps in 2010, but that was 15 years later, and we did pass some pretty significant reform. It needs to be changed, I agree, for future hires. So to say we've done nothing, I think, is feeding into the rhetoric that the state is just ignoring the problem.
But what have we done?
The changes for future hires were among the most significant in the country. So I think there have been things done. It hasn't solved the problem, and so we're here to try to, so that there are groups trying to address that.
Let me go back to Representative Nekritz, because you're the Democrat sitting here who's an elected official. Why can't your party get it together and handle this? Because
let me interrupt. This is rude, but let me be her lawyer, because. And Darlene's, and I'll say this, because if there's anyone here that's been whipped around and made promises from people and things on behalf of the rest of you, it's me. But you can't, this lady...
I want an analysis. I'm not blaming her for anything.
The analysis is last year, the governor didn't, people can like this or not, because he's on the case now. He didn't want to deal with it. We won't go into that history. Last year, TRS said, we've never missed a pension payment. What are you talking about? Well, now we know that the real numbers were being hidden, okay? Last year, when everybody else was, not everybody, a large number of the people in the Republican and Democratic Party were screwing around in Springfield and telling everybody what they wanted to hear in the media, Elaine Nekritz, she is a Democrat, and she's a trusted ally of the Speaker, and he gives her all the hot, difficult things. You can count on her. She put her neck out there, and I remember the conversation, because... the odds are because she showed courage. And Darlene, the same thing with the Republicans, when a lot of the Republicans were saying one thing publicly and not wanting to fight with their local teachers, the IEA and the IFT. These two ladies, the reason they're on this committee now and why I have a great optimism is because they are courageous, they're smart as hell, they know the topic. The governor knows that, Speaker Madigan knows that, Senator Cullerton knows that, and Henry and I know that. So, you know, it's entertaining, but you can't expect her to all of a sudden say things publicly that'll be reported that are going to make it more difficult for her to do her job.
We want some analysis. It's what I'm asking for. I'm not blaming her. She's great, but you know she is. She does her job. She represents the district.
Can I offer
very
my
well.
analysis?
We want to know what is the dysfunction. Why is the party?
Well,
when we have a Democratic governor, a Democratic Senate president, a Democratic House Speaker, why this is taking so long?
Because they're trying to figure out how to cover an $85 billion unfunded liability. I think it would be true no matter who the governor but this problem. The reason we have the provision in the Constitution that we have that says that you can't diminish a benefit is because in 1970, at the time of the Constitutional Convention, the pension funds were about 45% funded, just as they are today. And so there were people who said, well, look, you know, we can't trust those legislators, not even knowing who they were going to be for the next, for the next generation. We can't trust them to keep their word. So we're going to put it in the Constitution that you can't reduce the benefits. They did that. All right. Now remember, we had, and I'm not trying to put the blame on the Republicans, but we had 30 years of Republican governors in the state from 1973,
and the budget was balanced.
We still had unfunded pension liability, and we had during those 30 years we had an unfunded pension liability, and then the Democrats took over with Blagojevich, and he made the problem a little worse, or a lot worse. Edgar had put in place in the mid-'90s a regime. It was a ramp. It was very steep. It wouldn't really get tough until after he was gone, but it was a ramp. Everybody stuck. He stuck to it. Ryan stuck to it, and Blagojevich jumped off it. If he'd have raised taxes and stayed on that ramp, we wouldn't be here tonight. You'd be talking about some bigger problem. This wouldn't be the biggest. It'd be a problem. But also, let me just say this. Finally, let me just say this other thing, that Illinois has the worst funded pension plans of any state in the country. But make no mistake about it, this isn't just about the cost of the unfunded liability. This is going on in the state of New York with the Democratic governor. They just put in their 6th tier of pensions. Why? They're 100% funded. Their pensions are 100% funded. Because this is, frankly, there's an assault going on in this country across the board from both parties against the living standards for working people. That people in the private sector used to have defined pension benefits. 80% of big companies used to have them. Now it's like 20%, and that number is diminishing. And a lot of politicians are playing on people's resentments and saying, well, those cops and those firefighters and those teachers, there's what's wrong with this country. They're living off the fat of the land. I mean, we all tell our kids, you want to get rich? Become a firefighter, become a teacher, right? Isn't that what we tell them? No, but that's what they'd have us believe, that somehow teachers and firefighters and nurses and other public employees have caused the problem that we're confronting. But this is going on across the country, whether there's an $85 billion pension liability or no pension liability. The state of Wisconsin, 100% pensions. Their pensions were funded 100%. Governor Walker decided, this is a good opportunity to go after public employees, and that's what he did. So it's partly financial. It's partly just an assault on working people, which is going on by both parties.
Yeah, that's not what I'm doing, and the people I represent are doing, or these people are. But Henry does that, and he's got that down pretty well. But the important thing to remember is Darlene's point and Elaine's point. We've got to act now. Why? Because when the Civic Committee, which are business people, pointed this out, did a study back in 2006, and we called it to the attention of the General Assembly and the then governor, the unfunded pensions were $35 billion just 6 years ago. Just like when we don't pay our credit cards or the interest, well, the ramp goes. So from 2006 to 2012, it's now $85 billion. So we're burying ourselves. Every year lost makes it more difficult. And we, meaning all of us that are not in the public pensions, are going to have to pay that down to make sure that Henry and the people who are in there get their pensions. But you know what? That's right. It's only fair because they paid in. I don't disagree with that. But it's not an us versus them.
Mr. Fahner, act now.
Act now.
I'm not saying this is what we will do, but what do you think we should do right now? What do you think we should do right now? Let's get down to cases.
We should pass pension legislation. Hopefully it'll come out of this committee at some point that will guarantee that the pensions of the people that have earned them, the obligations are met. Everything frozen in place. Going forward, just like in everybody in the private sector, we can't bear the load anymore. So going forward, they're going to have to make some accommodations. And by that I mean whether we have tax increases or we don't. They're going to have to either pay more to get what they want or get less going forward. Because all the rest of us who don't have public pensions have had to do that, whether we have 401ks or not. The other point, so make sure that that's covered, and then have a plan. We have to have a plan to pay off the debt. We've got to get them up to 100% funded by 2045 or thereabouts, like Wisconsin, like New York. And then we have to have a plan where the rest of us over the next 20 or 30 or 40 years pay off that obligation. We can't just write it off because our bonding ability, it goes to the health of the state.
So we're talking 401ks here. We're talking a system where we give them an option.
I've varied on. I'm sorry. You're right. I mean, a combination of things. It might involve COLAs. It might involve or not raising the age of retirement or not. But in the aggregate, it has to be something that will solidify the pensions and then have a workable way of keeping that going forward, having a program. And I think there are all sorts of ways to do it if people are willing. And the only point I want to take, and this is not a cheap shot at Henry at all, but it is a point that I bring up. If we take Henry's and Senator Cullerton's, I wish he were here, he's a charming man, and Eric Madeir, great young lawyer, but he's wrong. If we take their advice and say, you can't change one thing of this because it's guaranteed in the Constitution, then we're wasting our time here because we just have to let it go on as it is until the money runs out and everybody's screwed.
Representative Senger, I thought I saw you kind of moving toward the microphone. What do you think? You said we've got to act now. We've got to do something now. What do we do? Just tell us what you think we should do. Not that we'll do it.
Yeah. We know we've done a lot of work. We ran the analysis. We know what moves the needle most on the unfunded liability, which is the COLA. But what we need to do now is, Henry and I and everyone else, we need to sit down to figure out, what will work for everyone to make this sustainable going longer. There's a lot of options here. We can be real vague and general on some things. We know the things that move the needle the most. We have tools in our tool chest. And even if you say COLA, there's a lot of ways you can manage the COLA. For example, in Rhode Island, they put a suspension on COLAs, which they'll bring back once they pay down the...
Should we do that here in Illinois? What do you think?
It's something I would like to really be serious about.
Anything else that we should do right now?
There's other pieces in there too, which we're not talking about it, but I do like the hybrid way of doing things, the defined benefit plan on top of a defined contribution plan, because it has a lot of, again, making sure you're going to have the money you need for retirement, but you also are reducing that unfunded liability in a great way. Raising the age, we've pretty much had everything on the table. What we have done now is, again, we've got to sit down. We know what tools are in our tool chest and figure out what can work to make this problem once and for all not a problem.
Mr. Baer? The question is, what should we do to deal with this problem, this crisis? And we want to try to keep it like maybe a minute and a half.
Okay. I think what we should do is what we should have done 2 years ago when they rammed through that bill for new hires through the General Assembly, and what they did do later on when they sat down with the downstate, with the police and fire unions to work out something that was acceptable to them. I think that the parties are responsible, whether it be, if it's the city funds, the mayor ought to sit down with the city unions. If it's the county, then the county board president ought to sit down with the county unions. In the case of the state, the legislative leaders and the governor ought to sit down with the people who represent the state-funded pension plans and say, okay, here's the problem, here are the numbers. Is there, is there some way to reach an agreement on it? We're not going to reach an agreement here in an audience of 200 people if there is going to be an agreement, but I think we should work for that. I think it's important. The sooner we find a solution, the easier, and it won't be, not that it'll be easy, but the less difficult that solution will be. And that's what ought to be happening. It's beginning to happen in some places, but it should happen for the good of us all. It would be the sooner the better.
Representative Nekritz, what do you think? What do you think? Give us some concrete things that we should do, our government in Springfield should do this session to address this problem, pensions.
Okay. Well, I think we discussed a number of those already. And first of all, I agree with both Henry and Darlene that sitting down together is the best way to get that done. And in that regard, again, the biggest cost drivers we have are the annual adjustment to the annuity, the age of retirement, making sure that the state actually fulfills its obligation to the pension systems, and then I could seriously consider shifting the normal cost to the actual employer as a policy matter to align the person paying the benefits with the person setting the salaries.
One thing that, and I think that Mr. Bayer made the point, we do a lot of stories about these really, really egregious cases of abuse when people are clearly gaming the system. And those stories are put out there, and the average worker takes the hit because that's the person that is getting the normal or average pension, no matter whether it's $32,000 or $61,000, whatever. That person is taking the hit when we do those kinds of stories. And what do we do about that? I mean, how did this happen that people could game the system and end up making well over $100,000 in a pension when they didn't make that much when they actually worked?
Well, two reasons. One, because the law allowed people to do it, and people took advantage of the law, and they did it. Most of the abuses that I'm aware of, what people might consider abuses, have been, the law has been changed to prevent them from happening again. Like they used to be like legislators could be a legislator and go to work for even one day or 1 week at a higher salary, and their pension, which might be up to 80% of their salary, was based not on their legislative salary, but on the salary for that week. That law has been changed. Some of the laws that affected members of labor unions that allowed them, although I will say in that case, most of those individuals paid themselves out of their own pockets the employee and the employer share of the pension based upon their salaries as union leaders, but that's been changed as well. So
Go ahead.
Most of what people would consider abuses, I think the law has been changed, and if it hasn't, the next time it's revealed, it will be. That's one thing the legislature acts quickly on.
I would completely agree. But I just want to expand a little bit, because I think every time there's been a newspaper story recently or some other media report, yes, the legislature's been right on it and has changed it. But to Henry's point about there were some of the labor leaders that took advantage of a loophole to really boost their pension salaries. But what happened then is that the average rank and file legislator who was actually just going to work for their labor union but not taking an increase in salary, and the union was paying both the employer and the employee's share, and then at some point that employee was going back to work as the regular rank and file employee. The legislation that we passed probably ended that practice, but there was no abuse to it. There was no problem with it, but we couldn't figure out a way to satisfy the appetite of ending the abuse without also ending the practice. And that's the kind of, I just want to throw that out there, not because it's just the kind of complexity that a lot of times we deal with in the legislature, that things appear to be black and white, but I got to tell you, in our world, it's all gray. It's all grays. And so that we ended up hurting some people as a result of that didn't deserve to be hurt.
And again, I'd like to thank the BGA for having this session let's talk about it. We need to talk about it a lot more, and thank you all for talking about it, bringing it out in the open. Andy?
Yeah, well, first, Charles, thank you for moderating. Thanks for the kind words about the BGA. ABC 7 is in good hands with Charles at the helm of the political coverage. And I think what's really encouraging tonight is that I think everyone agrees. All four of the people up here agree, and I think everyone in the audience agrees, and I know I certainly feel this very strongly, that there is a will to solve this, and it's going to occur by people of goodwill sitting in a room together and hammering over the numbers, looking at the political calculations, looking at the possibilities, because I think everyone knows, whether we agree on the tactics and the strategies, everyone agrees that it's a problem that has to be confronted now, and the concept of not kicking the can down the road for another year is critical. We can't have good government in the state. We are incrementally moving in that direction in the city, the county, and the state right now, but we have to be vigilant 24/7. So join us in this struggle, which is really it's a noble one. Join us in this struggle, and everybody, let's get pension reform and lots of other reforms in Illinois. Thanks very much.